All right, here are the steps I would take towards doing a simple pone. This is a 1x1 square. This one looks like it's about 2 inches tall. You could really do it with about any size. The first thing you're going to want to do is make this square piece round. The simplest way to do that is to start knocking off corners. On this, some people do find it easier if you just draw a little bit just to have a guide. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just a little guide of on the top and bottom of what that circle is going to look like. And then you can start knocking off corners. And to make something square around, you just keep taking corners off until there's no corners left. So first cuts are going to be taking those corners off. So I'm going to start here, and you'll notice that one way that you take a cut, you'll get nice clean shavings, and the other direction it'll kind of chip out. So that's the grain direction of the wood. There's not really a right or wrong on that. It's just something that you'll learn to work with over time. And if you cut against the grain or with the grain, you can make nice cuts like that. If you make a cut against the grain, you have to use a little bit more of a sweeping motion so that you don't end up with rough cuts. So that's kind of the first. I've kind of took those two circles close together on the corner. Do the same on each corner. Doesn't have to be big cuts. You can take smaller cuts and work up to it. And again, at the bottom, it's going to chip out a little bit. So then I'll just have to shape that a little bit to smooth it back out. Doesn't have to be perfectly smooth at this point. Sorry, got out of the camera there a little bit. The first round, I've pretty much taken it from a square to an octagon. Just keep knocking corners off, and once all the corners are gone, we'll have a nice round piece to start with. See, that side's starting to get pretty round. So now I've taken from a square to mostly round piece. Not perfect at all, but mostly round. You can spend more time getting there if you want to. You can take before you start, find the center point, and then use a compass to draw a circle, and then you can have a better guide. But this is close enough for where I'm trying to get to. I'll grab my pencil. So the next thing, your pone has kind of got a shape that swoops up to a knob on the top, and then sort of a base all the way around. So the first thing I'm going to do on this part is just mark my base all the way around. And again, you can kind of, if you want to make measurements, you can make measurements, but I just measure with my finger and keep my pencil at the same place and mark all the way around. So I got it marked all the way around it. Then I'm going to start some swooping cuts up to start shaping it into this shape all the way around it. Not going to go all the way to the diameter of this final because we'll need to cut into that a little bit later. So just starting some swooping cuts. This is a little harder with some of these pieces, but instead of just a straight cut, I'm actually cutting. You see a little bit of that shape that's going in. I'll cut a little bit more so you can see it. So there, you start to see the shape of that coming into it. And I'll do that all the way around. You don't have to take as much wood with this first cut as I'm taking. A couple of little cuts are the same as one big cut. Especially recommend gloves all the time, but for smaller pieces like this, sometimes the knife's hanging over the wood a little bit more than you really think it is. That's always good. So again, just want to keep bringing those up, kind of evening that out a little bit. Just turn it over in your hand, see if there's spots that are higher or lower than others, and try to even them out. This wood's wanting to chip a little bit more than normal, so I'm having to drag my knife across as much as just pushing it up sometimes. So now I've got kind of the basic shape at the bottom coming in. You can always go back and cut more. Can't ever add it back on, so just be aware of that. The next thing I would do would be to start marking where the ball is going to be at the top. This is much bigger than you want the ball. You're probably going to want the ball to be about that big when you finish, but you go ahead and start a little bit earlier. That way you make sure you have plenty of wood reserved for it. So we're going to do about the same thing here that we did at the bottom, except we're going to do stop cuts here instead of that swooping cut. So again, mark that about the width, or about what the diameter of that ball is going to end up being. We'll just go ahead and mark that there. So this is where you call a stop cut. So the first thing you do is you cut your knife straight into the wood here. You can rock a little bit to get it a little bit deeper into the wood, and then you push the knife up until it stops at that part that you just made. So that's a stop cut. Make a stop cut all the way around. So another place to be careful with a small piece, because this cut right here could cause that to come off, depending on how thin the wood is and how brittle that wood is, how much pressure you're putting on. You can move wood with your knife, but don't ever try to pry wood out with the tip of your knife. That's a real fast way to break a blade. So let the cutting edge do the work. So you can see I've got those little chips that are left in there. So you just go back in with a straight in cut and those come right out. So that's what I'm gonna do the most of the way around now, just to make this smaller, is continue to cut up to that stop cut, and then those chips will hang in, cut right at the top, and it falls right out. So you set that in, you start to make more of the shape of the pone as well. So here you can start even scooping that in a little bit more, kind of evening those cuts out, where you kind of made a little ridge around here with that last set of cuts. Now you can kind of even those out up to the top. And you end up with all those chips. So just go in once more and relieve those chips. Some people like to go back later on and clean stuff up. I like to keep my carvings pretty clean all the way through so that I don't have to go back and do that. But that's just a preference. You can always go back, like these little places here. I've got a little places there that are not very clean. I'll go back and clean those up now. This is a good example here too, because probably that base is a little taller than I need it to be, but it's always better to start there because I can come back and make that base shorter if I want to, but you can't add it back on. All right. Well, that pretty well takes care of the first part. I'll split it into 2 videos so it's not so much in a single video. The next part will be shaping the ball and getting it finished up. Okay, for the second part, the biggest thing we want to do in this part is make this ball, or make this into a ball instead of just a disc sitting on top. So again, sort of like making a square round, we're going to start taking corners off. So you've got this kind of sharp corner here or edge around there. Start cutting that down. You see the profile of that, where it's going from being a sharp to starting to turn in. Here you don't want to take huge cuts, just little small cuts will get the job done. And you're starting to make this more and more thin at the top, so that does become a little more delicate. You want to be a little more careful around it. You somewhat got the ball shape around the bottom. Now we'll do the same at the top. here, I'm just going to take little small cuts, trying to smooth and round that a little bit. Just pull it back and look at it every once in a while, see if you're mostly round. If there's one side that, if this side's sticking out a little bit more than the other. And when you do that, you may end up making another ridge that you have to clean up. So just go back and do that. You're going to round all the way up to the top. When you end up with a carving, the only part that should be left with the original wood you started with is the bottom where it's going to sit. Everything else should have been carved to remove the marks from the bandsaw or whatever type of saw the wood came from. So getting those last few little marks, and that could be finished. It just depends. If you want a smaller ball, you just continue narrowing down the ball on top. But that's your very rudimentary shape of a chest pone. Again, if you like a little more swoop into it, or you want the base a little bit smaller, you can always go back and take a little more off of it. There's little fuzzies, just cut them back off. And just go back and look over it, and any places you see that are a little flatter than you want to be, just cut some little facets in to make them the shape they need to be. I got a little flat here, so I need to shape that back into a little more round shape. That's pretty much it. The style of carving I do, I normally do not sand, but if you wanted to have a very smooth piece, you could go back with sandpaper and sand this. If you sand, make sure you are finished with all of your carving before you start sanding, because if you use sandpaper on a piece and then go back and cut it with your knife, there will be pieces of that sand that stay in the wood, and they can make your knife get dull very, very quickly. So that's pretty much it.